Although demons are terrifying, there are people in the world who are much scarier. These people lived a dark life, causing pain and destruction wherever they went. Demons are entities created in darkness. These people made a clear sociopathic choice to be bad, so let's jump in. Coming in at number 5, we have Bella Gunnis. Bella Gunnis got away with all of her crimes in her pursuit of wealth. All of those around her perished. It is believed that she had around 40 victims between 1884 and 1908 before she disappeared without a trace. Bella was born in Norway and immigrated to the US in 1881. Her birth name was Brynhild but went by Bella. She was born in 1859. She decided to move to the US in search of money. One of her favorite ways to do this was through insurance claims. She met her first husband in 1884. He was a wealthy man who owned his own business. Not long after they were married, their home and store burned to the ground. They claimed the insurance for both buildings. Not long after this, her husband passed away due to heart failure. This was the first time it seemed suspicious, as he passed on the day his old and new life insurance policies overlapped. She claimed on both policies. Even with all of this insurance money, Bella was not done and more unexplained deaths followed her sociopaths. She married her second husband, Peter Gunnis. Not long after this, Peter's daughter and he himself passed away, along with her adopted daughter a few years later. It was at this point that Bella had bought herself a farm with a large amount of land where she spent the majority of her time. She began to use lovelorn columns to look for potential suitors. They would go to her farm, bringing with them large amounts of cash, but once they arrived, they were never found again. After years of this happening, Bella fled. An investigation found 40 victims on her property. She was never interrogated, so we will never know if there were other crimes that she committed. She was one of the most dangerous black widows of all time, leaving no man alive in her pursuit of wealth. Coming in at number 4, we have H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes was America's first ever serial killer. He was born in 1861 and the majority of his crimes took place during 1893. Some conspiracy theories even claim he was Jack the Ripper, but this is just a theory. Holmes was born in New Hampshire to an affluent family. He grew up privileged and was said to be unusually intelligent from a young age. He showed interest in the medical field and started to perform surgery on animals. There were even claims he could have been responsible for the death of his childhood friend. His life of crime first began while he was studying medicine at the University of Michigan. He was found stealing corpses and using them to make false insurance claims and then experimenting on them. In 1885, he moved to Illinois, where he ran a pharmacy after the owner mysteriously vanished. With his respect in the community and family wealth, he began to construct a hotel nearby. The house was a maze of hidden passageways, trapdoors, and rooms soundproofed behind thick walls. His quarters were on the top floor, while guests would stay on the middle and ground. Although it seemed like a high-end hotel, many visitors did not ever check out. He had hidden rooms where he would trap and torture guests. He would leave them for days without food or water before dumping them down a chute to the basement where he'd set up his lab for his experiments. It was said not only did he lure guests to the hotel, but also those looking for employment. He would hope that if travelers went missing, no one would have known their last location or come looking. Before social media, it was not as easy to know where someone was staying while they traveled. He also had a habit of getting engaged just to have his fiancée disappear before they could get married. It is estimated that before his eventual arrest, he had taken the lives of 20 to 200 people throughout his life. This shocked the world. Nothing like this had ever happened before. People became a lot less trusting.
Number 3. Bradford Bishop. Until I can prove that he's dead, I'm going to assume he's still alive. That's the words of Montgomery County Sheriff Raymond Knight, speaking on our next entry, Bradford Bishop. This notorious criminal has been on the FBI's most wanted list for years, and has managed to elude capture this entire time. In fact, he was taken off of the FBI's most wanted list in late 2018 to accommodate more serious fugitives, and FBI had some reason to believe he might not even still be alive. Bradford Bishop was an unusual case, as he was a fairly promising career man with no stains on his record. He was working as a counterintelligence official, a former army serviceman, and he worked as a diplomat. Life seemed to be going fairly well for Mr. Bishop, who fathered 3 children with his wife Annette, where they lived in Bethesda, Maryland. On March 1st, 1976, Bradford was passed over for a promotion at work that he was due for. He left the office a little bit early, telling his secretary he wasn't feeling well that day. He would then drive to his bank, he withdrew a large amount of money, and he went to fill up gas in his car and then to a hardware store to purchase a shovel, pitchfork, and a sledgehammer. Bradford would then return home and ended the lives of his family members one by one. He would carry their bodies into the trunk of his car, where he drove them deep into the swamp nearly 300 miles away, where he buried and lit the bodies ablaze in a shallow grave, burning the remains of his once happy family. There would be a few sightings of Bradford afterwards. He was last seen buying tennis shoes with an unknown woman and a dog March 2nd. On March 18th, his car was discovered by police at an isolated campground all the way over in Tennessee. The contents of the car were unnerving. A blood-soaked blanket, a shotgun, an axe, and the well for the spare tire was soaked in blood. A jury indicted Bradford, and that was the last time any evidence of the case ever emerged. Now, since then, there have been numerous unproven sightings, sporadically appearing throughout Europe mostly, but nothing that has contributed to an arrest. If Bradford Bishop is still alive, he is 86 and has still evaded capture. Number 2. The Freeway Phantom. The Freeway Phantom was the self-given nickname of a serial criminal around Washington, D.C. who has never been identified. He first made himself known in the early 1970s, seemingly taking a page out of the Zodiac's coded puzzling handbook. The Freeway Phantom taunted the police with cryptic messages and puzzles teasing his capture. 18-year-old Brenda Denise Woodard was found dead in November 1971 with a note inside one of her coat pockets. The note read out as follows: "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. Signed, the Freeway Phantom." The name happened to catch on. There are a few criminals who offer to write their own monikers, but clearly the Freeway Phantom had a brand in mind. Over the course of a 17-month period, 6 similarly aged young black women were found all along the highway, all missing their shoes and all showing visible signs of trauma. Police had been working on what they thought had been promising leads, including an investigation into 2 former police officers who were being convicted of a separate crime. However, none of these investigations ever turned up anything concrete, leading the FBI to take charge of the case in 1974. However, it was around this time that the trail started to go cold, and no more deaths following the Freeway Phantom's MO appeared, luckily. Although tragically for the victims' families, no justice would ever be found either. The investigation is still active in some aspects in Washington, D.C., although, given that it's been 5 decades since the first victim was found, it's hard to think that any serious progress might be made on this case. Perhaps the identity of the Freeway Phantom will never come to light, but at the very least, it seems as if the brutal series of crimes had stopped. Number 1. The vending machine. When you were younger, did you ever hear about the urban legend of someone putting poison in candy, or someone putting a razor blade inside of a chocolate or an apple or something and giving it out to trick-or-treaters? Probably have. I mean, I've even talked about it before in a previous video on urban legends. It's the kind of story that you'd hear on a playground and it would scare you and stick with you for life. You tell yourself that kind of thing only happens in the movies, and no one in their right mind would ever go around poisoning unsuspecting people. But that's perhaps because you've never heard of this case. The case of the mysterious vending machine criminal in Japan. This wave started in April of 1985. People around Western Japan, primarily in Tokyo, were dying under mysterious circumstances. The first victim died shortly after purchasing 2 bottles of a popular Japanese soda, Orinamen C. In the next coming weeks, there were 35 cases of mysterious poisonings, all tracked back to Orinamen C purchased at vending machines. At the time of the crime spree, the company producing Orinamen C had been running a promotion where their vending machines would give out a second bottle of the product after purchasing one, and the criminal took advantage of this fact, lacing bottles of the soft drink with a powerful poison, and he placed them inside or on top of the vending machines to deceive consumers into believing that they'd been a winner of the promotion and they got that extra second bottle. Shortly after, police issued citywide warnings across all vending machines to inspect each drink carefully to see if the seal on the bottle cap had been tampered. Of these 35 cases, 12 of them were fatal, making the Orinamen C tampering the deadliest product tampering case in history. Police had absolutely 0 leads, and the nature of the crime made it incredibly difficult to track down, as the bottles had been dispersed seemingly randomly across Western Japan. As well, there did not appear to be any greater motive, no intentional victims. There was nothing to link them together, as the victims that had all been afflicted had been completely random. Police had suggested, though, that they think the suspect was a single agent acting alone, who had meticulously planned the crime. A psychologist suggested possibly that the crime was carried out as a response to Japan's orderly and aggressive work culture, and that this was a lashing out by hurting unsuspecting people that the victim would never have to face. They would get a sense of rush and control, but never have to directly deal with the consequences. Whoever was behind the Orinamen C tampering spree was never caught. There were cases across Tokyo afterwards police suspected might have been copycats, but no leads and no arrests were ever made.
Coming in at number 3 we have Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, was born in 1960 in Texas. He was one of 5 children. When he was 5 years old, he was knocked unconscious by a swing. It was said that this caused great trauma to his brain and he began experiencing epileptic fits. As he was growing up, he grew close to his cousin Miguel. He had returned from fighting the war in Vietnam. He would tell Richard stories of his torture of soldiers and women while he was at war. Horrifying stories that he was proud to tell. He even had photos to show him of what he had done. At the age of 13, Richard witnessed his cousin taking the life of his wife. When he was 14, he dropped out of school. He was arrested for the first time at 17 for possession of marijuana. He then moved to California where he started to do crimes to get by. He started to cultivate an interest in Satanism, leading him down an even darker path. His theft turned to violence in 1984 when he committed his first home invasion. In the 60s, it was more common to leave your doors unlocked as people were not as concerned about safety issues in their neighborhoods. Richard took advantage of this. He would move in the dead of night stalking women who were home alone. At first, his attacks would be months apart, but they soon got more frequent. Although some of his victims managed to escape, he was still able to avoid detection. They could not track him down, but his satanic symbolism left at the scene was a clear indication that it was his doing. He soon coined the term Night Stalker as he snuck into people's homes during the night undetected. In his final attack, he left a footprint. His car was spotted and his victim gave a detailed witness report. This led to his eventual capture. He was beaten by LA residents while attempting to steal a car. His face was all over the media at this point and he had nowhere to hide. During his rampage throughout a number of years, he took the lives around 14 and attacked dozens more. He spent the rest of his life in prison. Coming in at number 2 we have Charles Manson. Charles Manson was a cult leader in the late 1960s. His cult went on to make history after their brutal acts carried out under his command. Born Charles Maddox in 1934, his mother was only 16 and suffering from addiction problems. His mother married William Manson, giving him the famous last name, but the marriage ended quickly and Charles was sent to a boys' school. His mother rejected any attempt he made to return to her and he was soon living on the streets doing petty crimes to get by. Over the next 20 years he was in and out of prison. In 1967 he was released and decided to move to San Francisco. Feeling cast out from his own mother, he started his cult and referred to them as the family. He grew his cult to around 100 followers who shared his passion for an unconventional lifestyle. The Manson family eventually moved to a deserted ranch in San Fernando Valley. His following included a large number of young girls who believed he was a prophet. These girls were often used to lure victims or other members to the cult. It is thought that the cult carried out around 35 attacks before they were finally stopped. One of the most well known of their victims was actress Sharon Tate, who was pregnant at the time of her attack. It was in August 1969 he gathered together his most loyal to attack Hollywood's elite. He wanted to go for the beautiful people with fame and money. It was said that Manson felt rejected by the showbiz world when he had attempted to get his own recording contract and wanted revenge. He himself did not take part in any of the actual violence. When the family was arrested, the police had no idea that they committed these acts of violence. They were arrested for vandalizing the property they were staying on. One of the members gave a confession and they finally connected them to the crime. The members were given life in prison. At the trial they showed no remorse in their acts and even said they wished they had done more. And finally, in at number 1 we have Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was a notorious American criminal. He was born in 1946 and started to commit his crimes during the 70s. There are many novels, films and TV shows about his life. What was the most disturbing about Ted was his ability to live a normal life and even being well liked while he was committing these horrible acts. He lived a normal life and was seen as a successful, intelligent man. His mother Eleanor was a single mother when she gave birth to him. No one ever knew who the biological father was, although there have been some guesses over the years. When he was born, much of Eleanor's family shamed her for having an illegitimate child. He was seen as a sin and the family's dirty secret. For many years, Ted was told that his mother was his sister, and he was adopted by his grandparents. Eleanor eventually took Ted and moved to Washington. His mother married Johnny Bundy, and although Ted took his last name, he did not have respect for this new stepfather. He believed he was too uneducated and working class for his family. They went on to have more children, although it does not appear Ted was close to any of his siblings. At a young age, he became obsessed with knives. Then as a teenager, he grew the obsession of watching people through their windows and stealing things he wanted with no sign of remorse. He went on to earn a degree in psychology and was active in the community. He worked on the campaign for the Republican governor and even received an award for his work. He had his first heartbreak during the school days, and later on it was clear some of his victims resembled the girl who had left him. His crimes would often consist of luring women into his car. They would never be seen again. During the 70s, when he was working in the community and seen as a charismatic professional, this is when he was the most active with his crimes. He would travel around taking the lives of these women and then be back at work the next morning. When he was finally caught, everyone who knew him was shocked. He portrayed himself so well no one could believe he would do this. Even once he was on trial, he gained a following of women worshipping him. They didn't care about his crimes against his victims. One of the victims finally escaped in 1975, and this began the downfall. Though he somehow escaped from prison twice, he was eventually captured for the last time and sentenced to the electric chair.
Number 2. Guy de Rais. The nobleman slash serial killer had reportedly turned to the dark occult, a wooded practice sometime around 1435 when he tried to invoke up the devil himself to help him gain knowledge, power, and riches. Scholars have documented events such as this and have claimed that this man is the sole inspiration for the infamous fairy tale Bluebeard. However, the very true and real story of this Frenchman is much sicker in nature. A distinguished knight and once a lord who at one point served as a military commander for Joan of Arc in the 100 Years' War, Guy de Rais' reputation was somewhat besmirched when he was arrested for crimes relating to Satanism, abducting, and of course the countless murderings of numerous young adults. After his arrest in 1440, de Rais was put on trial, and though he was found guilty of abducting, torturing, and the murder of more than 140 people, terrifying in itself, many researchers and folklore believe it's somewhere around 800 young adults. I bring up de Rais because after researching about him, I understood why he deserves to sit at number 2. The Bluebeard-inspired life of de Rais can be read about, and in doing so, you'll soon realize why I'm racing through this atrocity of a man, and why he's number 2, and why he remains one of the most terrifying people who have ever walked this planet. And coming in at number 1, Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper was and is still an unidentified serial killer active in poverty-ridden districts in and around East London in 1888. Attacks ascribed to Jack the Ripper typically involved female prostitutes who lived and worked in the slums of London, killing at least 5 women and mutilating their bodies in an unusual manner. The removal of internal organs led authorities to believe that the purpose that the killer had was anatomical or a surgical-based knowledge. Highly educated, even possibly being a doctor himself or surgeon. In October 1888, numerous letters were received by the media outlets, and authorities from the Scotland Yard had been proposing that there was a murder amidst the city. The name Jack the Ripper was born. The letter is widely believed to have been a hoax and may have been written by journalists in an attempt to heighten paranoia in storytelling and in newspaper sales. The murders were never solved, and the legends surrounding these crimes became a combination of historical research, pseudo-history, and fear-inducing lore. What makes these murders so sickening and yet still so interesting is not only did they never find or identify the actual killer, but Jack the Ripper's murders suddenly came to a mysterious halt in the fall of 1888. But London citizens continued to demand answers that would never come. Then, or even now. The open and ongoing cases spawned attentions of writers, directors, and historians all around the world and continues to push the scientific method of evidence and DNA.
Number 5, the Servant Girl Annihilator. I can't believe I just said those words. The Servant Girl Annihilator. I can't believe that's the real name newspapers went with to call this guy. I know not everyone's gonna be able to get a nickname like Jack the Ripper, but you can't go around calling criminals stuff like the Servant Girl Annihilator. You're just gonna inflate their ego. You're making him sound like he's a Dark Souls boss, or he's gonna be jumping in the ring against Hulk Hogan and the Iron Sheik. Anyway, sorry, I had to get this out of the way before we could talk about it. I feel like we just had to address this name. We couldn't just look at that and move on. And you know the wildest part? He doesn't even have the craziest name on this list. Okay, let's get into it. The Servant Girl Annihilator was the nickname of a brutal night stalker who preyed on the streets of Austin, Texas in 1885, a full 3 years before Jack the Ripper would stalk Whitechapel and steal all the fame and fortune in the attacking women at night community. Despite his name, he actually didn't exclusively target women. Unlike his British counterpart, Mr. the Ripper, the SVGA attacked men and women, although he mostly focused his attention on women, and they were all servant girls, which is where the name came from. He ended up slaying 7 women and 1 man, and critically injured 6 women and 2 men on top of that. All of his victims carried out the same way, attacking them whilst they slept in their beds, and then dragging them out into the streets when he was finished with them, usually with a sharp object such as a knife or a needle sticking out of the ear. There was was a wild manhunt for the Annihilator, and it's said that in 1885, some 400 men were questioned and interrogated about the identity of the Annihilator. Elected officials apparently refused to believe that it could be the work of one lone psycho, thinking there was a group of men committing these crimes together for Lord knows why. While several men would end up being questioned, no one was ever successfully linked to these brutal crimes. He was never caught, but an increased presence by sheriff's department and citizens forming an armed militia to protect the streets were enough to scare off whoever was doing it into fleeing the area, and eventually the crime stopped. So where did he go? That's the question, because he was never found. There are some who even wonder if perhaps maybe he bought himself a train ticket and found his way to Whitechapel to continue his spree. And my friends, if you're looking for more true crime stories, more rumors, whispers, conspiracies, cryptids, aliens, video games, movies, and whatever else we got, Top 5 Scary has it all. Number 4, Bible John. Everyone on this list has a weird nickname. Everybody. I'm gonna tell you that right now. I'm just gonna spoil that for you. Coming up next on this list is going to be Bible John, who's got a name that is deceptively unassuming. Bible John was an infamous executioner who preyed on women in Glasgow in the late 60s. All of his victims he met at a popular nightclub, the Barrel and Ballroom. He operated for a few years and is confirmed to be connected to at least 3 cases and maybe more. He was subject to one of Scotland's most extensive manhunts. He was the first time a composite sketch in the country was ever used as the front page of the newspaper. All because there were so few details about the case or just who he was. What few tidbits of trivia and information we have on Bible John, his crimes, his motives, and his modus operandus come from one of the victim's sisters, who very briefly shared a taxi with Bible John and her sister on the night of her death. Her very brief witness, it was only a 20-minute trip, was all the information they had to provide investigators to form a psychological profile of him, aiding in the investigation. Now, the name Bible John would stem from his practice of obsessively quoting the Bible and ranting and raving about adultery to his victims before, well, you know. The statement we have with Gene Puttock states that in the short period of time they spent together, he was making nigh constant and frequent references to specific Bible passages and really hammering home how much he hated adulterous women. He preyed on brunette women who all looked fairly similar and found them all at the same nightclub, charming them and then attacking them. Their bodies would later be found naked in the streets with signs of strangulation. The only witness, one Gene Puttock, passed away in 2010 with no more leads and the case having been on ice for nearly 50 years. It's very unlikely Bible John will ever be found anytime soon if he's still out there. Number 3, the Doodler. Next up on this list is the Doodler. Like everybody else, don't let the goofy name fool you into thinking there is anything silly or funny about this guy. Now, this bizarre nickname would come about from his habit of drawing pictures of his victims before he would attack them. And I guess the drawer or the sketcher or the artist didn't quite roll off the tongue the same way that the Doodler did, and that's the name they went with. The exact body count of the Doodler is unknown, but police believe that it could be anywhere from 6 to 14 victims total in San Francisco, stretching from 1974 to 1975. Several men disappeared from the city's gay community and more were injured. And part of what made him so hard to identify is that despite the city's historically very liberal and accepting view of the LGBTQ+ community, at the time the larger mainstream whole community hadn't quite got there yet. And so several of the men who would end up surviving an attack were too worried about outing themselves to want to cooperate with the police, leading to very few victims cooperating with the police, meaning there was very little information for any of them to work with, and the criminal was able to successfully elude pursuit. Ironically, for someone named a Doodler, the composite face sketch they had from witnesses is the only real bit of evidence they ever had to work with. However, unlike a lot of the other cases on this list, this one is actually still actively ongoing. There's a $200,000 reward for anyone that has any additional information. And as of 2019, this case is still ongoing, with DNA and fingerprint evidence being used to try to narrow down the ever wide net of potential subjects of interest and hopefully get some closure on a horrible chapter in San Francisco's history. Number 2, Emperor Nero. Now, perhaps you've heard of Emperor Nero. You've probably heard the story of him playing the fiddle as Rome burned around him. But Honestly, historically, that barely even cracks the top 5 craziest things Nero ever accomplished in his tenure as emperor. Nero set a new standard for wildness as a world leader that I think has never been matched again. Where do I begin with him? Let's start off small. He had a dedicated legion of soldiers, referred to as the Augustans, whose sole function was to follow him around and clap and hype him up whenever he would perform. Now that's kind of harmlessly crazy. So what about the story that Nero used to use his enemies as torches for his gardens? Yeah, Nero had a passionate hatred for Christians, blaming them for the infamous fire that engulfed Rome, which some historians believe Nero himself started. That's pretty wild. But what about the fact that Nero would dress himself in the skins of animals with his romantic partners? Or about how he orchestrated the deaths of his mother and brother? Nero ensured his own position as emperor of Rome. Emperor Claudius married Nero's mother Agrippina, who then adopted Nero as his own son. When Agrippina poisoned Claudius, Nero took the throne, and then to ensure that he could keep that position on that lofty chair, he poisoned his stepbrother and would later poison his own mother to make sure no one could challenge him as emperor. He then enjoyed all the pleasures of Rome as much as he could. He depleted the treasury of Rome at one point solely to make a statue of himself in his own honor, the Colossus of Nero, to leave a lasting legacy. In the end, after years of insanity, Nero took his own life by ordering one of his own servants to stab him after being told he would be executed by the state as he was considered an enemy of Rome. He bemoaned what an artist the world was losing. Nero's proclivity for wild debauchery, outrageous pursuits of pleasure, intense wanton cruelty, and violence towards Christians led some people at the time to view Nero as the Antichrist himself. And to be honest, I get it. Number 1. Manson. Charles Manson. The most infamous cult leader in history. And he might very well be one of the most famous criminals of all time. Charles Manson had a hypnotic level of control over his devout followers, leading them to a dark crime spree that would claim the lives of 35 people. Now, Manson himself never raised a blade to anyone that we know of, but rather used his domineering charisma to orchestrate the slayings down to the littlest details. He had a grim vision of an apocalypse where he believed there was going to be a race war and that his family needed to prepare for this. And part of these preparations was bumping off key celebrities he had a list of. Manson had dominion over his followers, giving them sacrament every day when in reality he was just giving them illegal substances to keep them impressionable. He banned glasses, calendars, watches, clocks, and anything that would ground them to the real world and made them more malleable to his will. Now, Manson and his family are host to a number of conspiracy theories. There's a very popular one saying that Manson himself is a product of the CIA's MK Ultra brainwashing program, and this is why he was so effective at controlling other people, and that the whole Manson family cult was a CIA op to destabilize the hippie movement. But another very prevailing theory is that the Manson family were Satanists, and they were part of a nationwide cabal connected with other dark crimes around the same time, like the Son of Sam. Manson's obsession with evil, his dark dealings, and complete control over his subjects do make him seem a bit like a modern-day Lucifer. Could Manson have had a supernatural level of control over people? Number 3. D.B. Cooper. Now, our next entry, I would hesitate to call him as evil as the rest of some of these crooks, you know? Sure, he hijacked a plane, sure, he held the entire plane hostage, and sure, he stole $200,000 from the government, but that doesn't mean he's a bad guy. D.B. Cooper's case is one of contemporary crime legends, as all that I just described sounds like he would be FBI public enemy number 1, right? Like they'd be working around the clock to bust this guy. They'd have him within the week. He slipped through authorities' fingers, and to date, D.B. Cooper was never caught. We don't know if that was even his real name or just an epithet he was using for the plane. We don't know anything really too concrete about him. Depending on what your definition of success is, D.B. Cooper could possibly be considered one of the most successful criminals of all time. To get into the nitty-gritty of the details, on November 24th, 1971, a man using the possible alias Dan Cooper boarded a flight to Seattle, and almost as soon as it took off, he passed a note to a flight attendant indicating that he had a with him, and that he demanded that when the plane landed, he trade the passengers on the flight for $200,000 and 2 parachutes. That's a smart man. He didn't want to waste any of that money on parachutes. The note said that if anything funny happened, he would blow the plane up. They complied out of fear, and upon landing, he was given the money by local authorities. Cooper then seized the plane one more time, holding the flight crew hostage with plans to fly to Mexico City. But midway through the flight, Cooper pulled a little point break and jumped out of the plane with all the money with him. And that would be the last time anyone would have ever seen D.B. Cooper. The FBI chased him for years to no avail. Nothing was ever found. No body ever recovered. No suspect ever caught out of a laundry list of people of interest. Some of the bills were recovered, but that's the only piece of evidence. Now, my absolute favorite theory about D.B. Cooper, and it's kinda out there, is that he's legendary cinema director Tommy Wiseau, and that this is where his fortune came from, as the man is shrouded in mystery regarding where his seemingly limitless supply of money comes from and his mysterious origins. Is it completely ridiculous and has no basis in reality? Yes, but it's also hilarious. Now, as for any more likely suspects for Cooper, there were a couple of Special Forces veterans who lined up with physical descriptions who could have been capable of committing the heist, but no concrete charges were ever made, and to date, no trace was ever found. Number 2, the Zodiac. Possibly one of the most infamous cases in American history, the Zodiac was a notorious criminal, famed in equal measures for his slayings and for his chilling obsession and interaction with the police trying to track him. He was made a household name after a Hollywood flick starring Jake Gyllenhaal and Robert Downey Jr. depicting the efforts trying to find him. The Zodiac is known to be responsible for 5 different deaths terrorizing California in the late 60s and early 70s, although he himself claims responsibility for 37 victims. The Zodiac case became legend when he sent his now infamous letters to 3 separate newspapers, providing details only he could have known about the crimes, and challenging the police to a sick game of sorts, sending them incomprehensible ciphers and riddles that supposedly contained clues to his identity and the crimes within. Only one of his ciphers was ever solved, and the rest remain a mystery. The Riddler from the new Batman movie is a direct inspiration from the Zodiac's sinister dealings. For 5 years, the Zodiac would taunt his pursuers with riddles and codes, sending horrifying cards, taunts, a letter boldly displaying "My name is blank," and then a cipher below it teasing their inability to find him, a postcard with his symbol written in blood, amongst others. Part of what makes the Zodiac such a fascinating and truly horrifying case is how much he seems like a movie bad guy come to life. The planning makes him out to be some sort of sinister criminal mastermind, and it's hard to disagree with that proclamation when he's completely eluded any form of capture for the better part of 50 years. There were several possible suspects as to who the Zodiac could have been, but nothing conclusive. To date, people are still trying to find the answer, hoping something new might come up to put that nightmare to rest. And number 1, Jack the Ripper. If you want to talk about evil that's got some staying power, it's hard to top Whitechapel's most infamous resident ever. 134 years avoiding capture, which means he could still be out there. The 18th century Night Stalker has held an almost supernatural-like grip over public interest since we first ever heard about the case, surrounding the brutal 5 slayings we know about, who knows how many more. Preying on women and using the cover of the night, Jack eluded, stupefied, and taunted the streets of London, leaving a disgusting trail of blood and gore in his wake, leaving victims looking like the aftermath of a butcher's. He seemed to take a sickening glee in his violent delights, mocking his would-be pursuers, sending the police threatening letters and even organs from his crimes. Jack is an almost modern mythical boogeyman, appearing across hundreds upon hundreds of works of fiction, TV shows, movies, video games, you name it. Assassin's Creed even tried to say he was part of the Order. That's a little out there. There are some folk who offer that Jack the Ripper is the progenitor to all true crime fascination, which honestly kind of makes sense. As much as he terrified Londoners at the time, the media was obsessed with him, with the original media buzz surrounding him, paralleling how we talk about most brutal crimes these days. You can bet your bottom pounds that if Jack was terrorizing London today, there'd be podcasters talking about him in between sponsored ads for MeUndies. Jack's crimes shocked Londoners, as the vicious and public nature of the slayings were not exactly commonplace. So surely, in 130 years, someone had to have some idea as to who Mr. the Ripper was, right? Well, with a case as famous as this, obviously there are some options. A quick glance at Jack's Wikipedia page suggests a possible 31 different suspects over the years who've all been attributed to it. And those are just the ones who made the page. It's worth noting that we are still looking. We are still trying to find him, put this case to rest, because everyone wants to be the one to say they unmasked the Ripper. Number 5. Grigory Rasputin. Grigory Rasputin, the mad monk of Russia, was a mystical healer who wandered Russia in the early 20th century. Now, I could do a plot summary of what Rasputin got up to, but honestly, Boney M did a better job than I ever will, so just alt tab out of this video real quick, listen to that song, come on back. Okay. Did you? Well, if you didn't, the quick rundown is that the black monk genuinely believed himself to be a holy healer with otherworldly powers, and was appointed a lofty position by Tsarina Alexandra to heal the young prince of his hemophilia. He was rumored to be part of a secret order called Klisti, connected with all sorts of scandalous practices. Now, no official connection was ever made to Rasputin and the sect. Rumors of the man still persisted. He carried an infamous reputation around the country, with stories of his wild debauchery and black magic, stories of wild powers. Did he really have otherworldly powers? Given his infamous nigh immortality, I am a bit inclined to agree with him. The man simply could not be put down without serious effort. There was a plot to have him enticed by a courtesan and castrated until he caught wind of it. In 1914, he was in the chest by a beggar and shrugged it off like it was nothing. Now, of course, the most famous story of Rasputin was his assassination at the hands of the Tsar's cousin and a handful of noblemen. As the famous legend goes, he was poisoned, bludgeoned, and drowned, and still that wasn't enough until he passed later in the day. Was Rasputin just Russia's toughest customer, built different? Or did he have some sort of mystical help from another world? We may never know. And are we having fun with the channel, my little freaks and creeps? Stay subscribed for more scary content every single day. Number 4. Vlad the Impaler. You know, with a title like Vlad the Impaler, it's safe to assume that the guy was probably up to no good, demon or no demon. Perhaps you've heard the legend that Vlad Tepes was the inspiration for Count Dracula, which should tell you even more if you want to judge of this guy's moral character. Vlad was a prince of Wallachia, an area that's now known as modern Romania. Vlad grew up in a very dark period of Wallachian history, coming up while the Ottoman Empire was setting its sights on just about everything good in Eastern Europe. Vlad was made king of Wallachia, but first he was deposed and exiled after an assassination plot on his brother and father. He would reclaim the throne in 1458 and quickly began a campaign of bloodlust to show the world he was not someone you should be messing with. One of his most infamous acts, and where the dubious title comes from, was after fending off an Ottoman invasion, he impaled 20,000 soldiers and left them as a grim forest of the damned. And some legends say he would eat dinner in front of this. Downright demonic behavior. There's some debate as to whether or not he really is the inspiration for Dracula, although of note is that beside his infamous sobriquet Vlad the Impaler, he went by the nickname Vlad Dracul, owning from his father's position in the Order of the Dragon, which translated to Dracul. There are also stories of Vlad washing his hands with the blood of his enemies, which I'm gonna be honest, that kind of sounds like something Dracula would do. It's worth noting too, no one really knows what happened to Vlad's body. We know that he was slain in battle, and that he was eventually put down after years of carnage, but his body or grave has never been found. Perhaps it's because it's still walking, or flapping. Whatever a bat does. Number 3. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper is one of history's most infamous criminals, and honestly, maybe the most. Over 130 years ago, and we are still absolutely fascinated by his crimes, and we still don't even know for certain who he was. Could still be out there, he could still be at large. He terrorized Whitechapel through the year of 1888, leaving behind a series of sickeningly grisly crime scenes, torn apart and left in the street for all to see. There are at least 5 confirmed cases that are attributed to Jack the Ripper, but there are several more that are speculated to be attached to him, with some suggesting that it could be anywhere from 13 or higher. Jack eluded capture, stupefied his pursuers, and taunted his would-be captors, sending the police souvenirs, I guess, from his crimes, wrapping in the mail and sending them out. On one occasion, he did this alongside a threatening letter, boldly claiming to be from hell, known as the From Hell letter. The jeering letter taunted the police, inviting them to catch him, while he described the pleasure he took in his sick, sordid dealings. Investigators were downright stumped trying to find the guy. They suspected he didn't have any level of medical training, as his hurried slashes led them to believe he could have been a butcher. The way he slashed his victims was beyond horrific. He left them missing and in some cases beyond recognition. It seemed too like he could be in multiple places at once. A body discovered in New York a few years after the crime spree matched the victims of Whitechapel almost perfectly. Was it a human performing all these sickening acts? Or could the Ripper's mangling be attributed to a demon that was preying on the women of White Castle? It would explain how he was so elusive and managed to evade capture for all those years.
Coming in at number 5. Serial killers. I'm not talking about Lucky Charms and Cheerios, although I single-handedly could kill a box of cereal in like 10 minutes. Throughout history, humankind has shown us that it is capable of some pretty horrific things. Things that not only push along the evolution of our species, but slows it down, horrifies us, and downright disgusts us. Starting this list off, there are way too many serial killers throughout history to choose from, so I'm gonna focus really on one person in particular, H.H. Holmes. Herman Webster Mudgett, or notoriously and forever known as H.H. Holmes. This was a special type of serial killer because he is known not only today for being America's very first serial killer, but one of the most prolific. People definitely killed people before then, but what this man concocted only reinforces what made this person a threat to Satan himself. After moving to Illinois around the time of the 1893 Chicago Fair, Holmes set up constructing a 3-story hotel on the corner of West 63rd Street for weary travelers. Sounds pretty kind of him. One catch. This mansion, or later known as Murder Castle, was a labyrinth of specifically designed and constructed torture rooms. A number of rooms were found to have hidden peepholes, trap doors built into the floorboards, and even pipes through the walls that homes would pump gas into to be breathed in by the unexpected guests. A maze of secret passages, ladders, and hallways, eventually all leading towards chutes to the basement, the end of the maze and the final room, fully equipped with surgical tables and a furnace. Holmes was eventually arrested in 1896 for the murder of 4 people, but what makes this person one of the worst is before he was hanged, he admitted to killing at least 27 more in his sick, twisted funhouse. Although serial killers have made famous through the years, Holmes takes the cake due to his clever, innovative, and downright disgusting mind to torment his guests. This is basically just all the Saw movies stewed into one giant maze. Absolutely sickening. Number 4, Vlad the Impaler. Dracula. Before capes and fake fangs, people were afraid of people solely from reputation alone. You didn't need to dress frightening one night of the year to really scare the bejesus out of someone. I'm talking about real life. Vlad the Impaler was the second of 4 brothers born into a noble family of Vlad II Dracul. His name was derived from the Latin Draco, after his father's induction into the Order of the Dragon, created by Holy Roman Empire Sigismund, responsible for defending Christian Europe against the threatening Ottoman Empire. Vlad is believed to have been born in what is now Transylvania, central region of modern Romania. His name and reputation would be given to him later due to the ordered impaling of some 500 enemy boyars. Vlad was tasked with leading a force to defend Wallachia, back then Romania, from invaders. During his 1456 battle to protect his home, he was victorious in hand-to-hand combat, but let's get to the stuff that really makes this guy terrifying. In some cases, which led to all cases, Vlad would order a pole or pike, usually carved from wood, to be rounded, not sharpened, to avoid damaging internal organs and thereby prolonging the suffering of the victim to death. A giant spear secured into the ground. Nasty. The pole was then raised vertically to display the victim's torment and could take hours or even days for the impaled person to die. This guy really made a mockery out of his victors and forever known as not only killing his opponents in battles and war, but displays their carcasses to any empire-threatening house of Dracul. Legend says that Bram Stoker's Dracula was based on the events and details of Vlad the Impaler, and it is best guessed that if there was someone going around killing hundreds of people, draining them of their blood whilst alive, it was probably Vlad. Number 3. Dictators and warlords. If you're a history buff like me, then you are well familiar with the atrocities carried out by leaders of regions trying to secure peace and place all around the world. These people, mostly men, make up most of the responsibility of the death of the humankind. Infection, disease, and plagues can't touch the amount of bodies leaders, dictators, and warlords have countlessly used in the universal game for turf and power. Some of these leaders have reigned in the last 100 years, and we can still feel the effects of their acts and wishes now. Some of these people even include Genghis Khan, a ruthless military leader of the Mongol forces wreaking havoc and torture amongst its enemies everywhere in Northeast Asia, somewhere around 40 million people. Mao Zedong, 1893 to 1976. This man was one of the world's most notorious mass murderers, including somewhere around 200 million deaths. We felt, seen, and read the effects of the Germans during World War II, orders of highly educated scientists and doctors, the precise calculated ways to exterminate mass amounts of people under the guise of scientific knowledge about humankind. I'm not going to get into anything specific, and frankly, I don't even like saying some of these names out loud due to the disgusting acts that they've inflicted over the years. The amount of lives taken from the act of war will never be recorded accurately, and we'll never know how much of humankind was wasted for nothing kind at all. Some of these people are knocking on Satan's door as we speak, and I'm gonna let Big Guns downstairs just do what he does.
Number 2 on this list is Joseph Stalin. Ekharsh Merota writes, Joseph Stalin was dictator of the Soviet Union from 1922 till his death in 1953. As a young man, he was a robber and an assassin. For almost 30 years, he reigned with terror and violence in the Soviet Union. His decisions led to a famine that killed millions. Forget enemies, he even killed families of people who were fond of him. Under his rule, more than 1.5 million German women were assaulted, and in all, he easily killed over 20 million people. He once said, "One death is a tragedy, a million deaths is simply a statistic." Ironically, he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 1945 and 1948, and he died of a stroke in 1953. That famine that I just mentioned frankly does not get talked about nearly enough. Wikipedia writes, the Holodomor, also known as the Terror Famine or the Great Famine, was a famine in Soviet Ukraine from 1932 to 1933 that killed millions of Ukrainians. It was a large part of the wider Soviet famine of 1932-1933. The term Holodomor emphasizes the famine's man-made and allegedly intentional aspects such as rejection of outside aid, confiscation of all household foodstuffs, and restriction of population movement. As part of the wider Soviet famine of 1932-1933, which affected the major grain-producing areas of the country, millions of inhabitants of Ukraine, the majority of whom were ethnic Ukrainians, died of starvation in a peacetime catastrophe unprecedented in the history of Ukraine. Since 2006, this has been recognized by Ukrainians and 15 other countries as a genocide of the Ukrainian people carried out by the Soviet government. This was a famine that could have been prevented or dealt with, but just wasn't. It was actually intentional. There are reports of survivors who said that soldiers would come to their homes and specifically destroy any food that they had there for no reason. Stalin truly was void of emotion, and it's sad that a man like this actually existed. And finally, number 1 on this list is Hitler. I feel like this one should really be a no-brainer, guys. Adolf Hitler had so much hatred inside of him and was the architect of such overwhelming death that he has to be at the top of the list. Hitler was born in 1889 in Austria. He never had a great relationship with his family and fought often with his father. When he was younger, Hitler wanted to become an artist and would try and make a living by painting watercolors. Living off of being an artist is hard no matter how you try and do it, but it didn't help that public opinion of Hitler's work wasn't the best. Things changed for him though when World War I rolled around. He fought in this war from 1916 to 1918 and was actually awarded several medals for his service during this time. Experts say that World War I was a stark turning point for Hitler in his life, and this started him down the path that would later ruin so many lives. The Holocaust Encyclopedia writes, Adolf Hitler was the undisputed leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party since 1921. In 1923, he was arrested and imprisoned for trying to overthrow the German government. His trial brought him fame and followers. He used the subsequent jail time to dictate his political ideas in a book, Mein Kampf. Hitler's ideological goals included territorial expansion, consolidation of a racially pure state, and elimination of the European Jews and other perceived enemies of Germany. These goals were thankfully never achieved, but Hitler certainly did try. Over 6 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust, Hitler's sick and infamous genocide, and roughly 70 to 85 million people died in total during World War II as a whole. Nobody can say for sure that there wouldn't have been a Second World War if Hitler wasn't around, but it's clear that he played an extremely instrumental role in making it happen, which in turn caused so much suffering for the entire planet. A sick and evil man at his core, and somebody that the world could have used without.
Number 2, the Pickler. Now, I've talked about the Pickler before on this channel, but his story is so horrifying and honestly unbelievable that it's worth repeating at least once. Again, goes without saying, like every single entry else on this list, the Pickler leads you to believe this is going to be a silly story, but wait about a minute, I'll explain why he's called the Pickler and all the pieces will come together and you'll regret clicking on this video. This one's kind of a dark one. The Pickler's real name was Bela Kiss, and he worked as a tinsmith in the early 1900s, living in a humble small village in Hungary. He had been married and he had children, but his wife had left and with her took the children. He moved in a housekeeper who served as his sole faithful companion. His housekeeper would note that he seemed to entertain a plethora of female guests and was never hurting for women's attention, although she didn't talk to any of the guests much. Outside of his women callers, Kiss was actually fairly isolated. He kept to himself mostly, he didn't interact with his neighbors much at all or the community as a whole, instead preferring to tend to himself and living quietly alone with his housekeeper and his big collection of metal drums. He had a stockpile of metal drums all over his property, and when people would ask about them, he said that he was stockpiling gas. In 1914, Kiss would be conscripted to serve with the Hungarian army and left behind his home to his noble housekeeper. While deployed, Hungarian soldiers were running low on resources, and when they needed gas, some soldiers on patrol saw fit to take from Kiss's collection all over his property. However, when they went to recover recovered the gas, they were shocked to discover what the barrels actually contained. No gas to be found, but instead the bodies of several missing women floating in alcohol in an attempt to preserve or pickle their corpses. See what I mean? Not pleasant even remotely. There were 20 barrels in total, and inside each one was another missing woman. But perhaps most alarmingly of all of this is that they appeared to have been drained of their bodily fluids with punctures in the neck, which sounds made up. As if this guy wasn't scary enough, there's also the very real possibility that he might have been a vampire. Now, upon this discovery, the Hungarian army immediately moved to try and locate and apprehend Bela Kiss, but discovered that that would prove quite difficult, since he had both a very common Hungarian name at the time, and he was also deployed in the middle of the largest conflict the world had ever seen at the time, and was just one more face in a green uniform. Somehow, Kiss learned that he was being pursued and faked his death by leaving behind a corpse in a hospital that had his ID. Kiss fled and was never seen in Europe again. A few scattered sightings would report him throughout New York, but he was never found and eluded capture for the remainder of his days. It's unlikely he's still out there, but you never know. And finally, number 1, the Zodiac. If we're talking about evil people who've managed to elude capture, it might feel a little obvious to put the Zodiac as number 1, you know? But he's also one of the most infamous, strangest, and scariest criminal stories in American history, so it's never a bad story. Well, it is. It's a terrible story, but it's a very interesting one to hear. The Zodiac terrorized California throughout the late 60s and early 70s, personally claiming responsibility for 37 victims. He stole headlines and media attention for years, as the state was fascinated and terrified by what he would do next, and if he would ever be caught. His exploits have been the subject of a few films and TV, most famously David Fincher's Zodiac, starring Jake Gyllenhaal and Robert Downey Jr., dramatizing the investigation trying to find him unsuccessfully. Although he himself insisted that he left a trail of 37 bodies, the police were only ever able to connect 5 different deaths to the Zodiac. People would be attacked by a lone gunman, with nothing seemingly connecting the cases. Motive, modus, everything was unclear. The case would become legendary when he sent his infamous letters to 3 separate newspapers, containing details that only the real assailant could have possibly known about the crimes, inviting and challenging police to a game to catch him. He sent out a postcard boldly displaying "My name is," and then a blank spot with an invitation to solve one of his puzzles. If you saw the new 2022 Batman movie, Paul Dano's Riddler is directly inspired off the Zodiac, all of his methodology, taunting people, leaving weird riddles at his crime scenes, that sort of stuff. His letters were threatening, taunting, and incomprehensible. The code he wrote in would stump detectives for years, to this day, with only one of his ciphers ever being solved, and it not being nearly enough to connect any dots. The riddle that was solved spelled out a confession of sorts, but it mostly served as the Zodiac gloating about the nature of his crimes and saying that he did it solely because he thought it was fun and that it was the most thrilling, fun thing a man could do. Described it as being better than hunting games or getting your rocks off. He didn't mention whether or not it was better than writing riddles and codes though. Now at the time, obviously they looked into just about everyone they could, and there were several prominent suspects and people of interest, but nothing concrete and final. The rest of his riddles were never solved, and as far as we know, he was never caught. However, in 2018, a private team of investigators was absolutely determined to close the case once and for all, and put an end to one of California's most infamous mysteries. They had identified an 80-year-old Gary Francis Post, who had passed away. He resembled the composite sketches of the Zodiac, and forensic evidence had actually made some compelling arguments that could tie it to being him, but the FBI have denied this claim, and say that they still consider the case open. Will it ever be closed within our lifetime? We may never know, but the one thing that's certain is that we are not going to stop trying until we get some answers. You want my theory? Personally, I think Jack the Ripper is the Zodiac. I think that would be the ultimate plot twist to the end of all of this.
Number 3. Nikolai Zhumagaliev, the Metal Fang. Nikolai was born in 1952 in the Soviet Union. He went to railway school before being conscripted into the Soviet army. After his service ended, he tried to go to university or become a driver, but failed at both. He worked various odd jobs, including that of a sailor, a forwarder, an electrician, a bulldozer operator, and a firefighter. He spent a lot of this time fantasizing about and planning murders, committing his first in 1979 on a woman he had encountered traveling across a rural path. He committed 5 more murders that year, whose victims he then cannibalized, and may have committed more if not for the fact that one night he got extremely drunk and accidentally shot one of his co-workers. He was arrested, diagnosed with schizophrenia, and sent to a mental institution. He was released less than a year later, and he resumed his murders, committing 2 more. His 9th murder is what resulted in him being captured, as he'd invited guests over to his home. He brought one of the guests into a different room, killed them, and began dismembering them with an axe. The other guests walked in on this and fled the scene before calling the police. They came to get him, but were so shocked at the sight of him that he managed to escape before being captured the next day. He was declared insane and incarcerated in a mental hospital where he remained for the next 8 years. In 1989, while being transferred to a different hospital, he managed to hijack the vehicle and escape. He was able to avoid capture for 2 years, killing at least one more person while at large, before he allowed himself to be caught stealing sheep. His hope was that he would not be recognized and could go to jail for a relatively minor offense. The story he gave the officers didn't add up, and a colonel familiar with the case was sent to check the situation out. He identified Nikolai, and he was sent back to a mental hospital where he remains to this day. Number 2. Ted Bundy. The most well-known of the monsters on this list, Ted Bundy was a cold-hearted murderer who would feign injury in order to get close to women and then attack them into unconsciousness in order to take them to a secondary location where he would take advantage of them before strangling them to death. He would often return to the bodies of the victims where he would subject the corpses to further indignities before decomposition made this impossible. He later confessed to 30 murders, but the authorities believe his real body count is likely extremely larger. In one of the first examples of computers being used to investigate serial killer crimes, authorities compiled all the information they had based on witness statements to come up with likely suspects, and the computer produced a list of 26 names, one of them Bundy's. At the same time, detectives made a list manually of their 100 best suspects. When Bundy's name appeared on both lists, he became their number 1 suspect, but word came out that he had already been arrested. A highway patrol officer had seen Bundy cruising a residential area and fleeing upon seeing the police car. When searched, they found a crowbar, handcuffs, a ski mask, rope, and an ice pick, among other suspicious items in Bundy's car. He was soon linked to and found guilty in a kidnapping case until the authorities gathered more evidence to charge him with the murders. In Utah State Prison, he attempted an escape and was placed in solitary confinement for several weeks before being transferred to Garfield County Jail. He was then taken to the Pitkin County Courthouse, where he chose to act as his own attorney. This allowed him to avoid having to wear handcuffs and shackles, and during a court recess, he was allowed into the court library to research his case, where he snuck away from his guards and fled through the library window. He made his way to an Aspen hunting cabin, which he broke into and stole food and a rifle from. He became lost in the mountains and eventually found his way back to Aspen, where he stole a car but was soon apprehended by authorities. He was sent back to prison where he acquired a hacksaw blade and spent 6 months sawing a hole in the bars in his window. He squeezed through the gap and into the crawl space, which led to the chief jailer's apartment, where he stole clothes and walked right out the front door. During the 2 months of freedom following his second escape, Bundy managed to kill 2 sorority girls and 1 12-year-old girl before eventually being arrested for driving a stolen car near the Alabama state line and being sent back to prison where he remained until his eventual execution. Number 1. Earl Nelson. When Earl Nelson was 2 years old, his parents died and he was sent to live with his grandmother and her 2 younger children. Even from his young childhood days, he exhibited self-loathing and morbid behavior, being expelled from his primary school as a 7-year-old. He got even worse after being hit by a streetcar and being knocked out for almost a week. Upon awakening, he began to suffer from intense headaches and memory loss, and his behavior became more and more erratic. He was in and out of prison as a young adult for relatively minor charges such as trespassing and larceny. He eventually ended up in Los Angeles County Jail, where he remained for 5 months before escaping and joining the Navy. He was committed to the Napa State Mental Hospital by a Navy psychologist who described him as living in a constitutional psychotic state. The doctors at the institution described him as suffering from hallucinations and paranoid delusions, but they deemed him relatively harmless. In his time at the hospital, he managed to escape 3 times, causing the staff to nickname him Houdini and eventually stopped searching for him. He was sent back to the hospital after trying to assault a minor, but escaped 2 more times before eventually being discharged in 1925. The next year, he began his string of murders. He would travel the country pretending to be a harmless traveling Christian, looking for women with rooms to rent. He would then be invited into the women's homes, whereupon he would assault and murder them by strangling them, not always in that order. A witness who saw him near the scene of the crime described him as a dark and stocky man with long arms and large hands, causing the newspapers to begin begin calling Earl Nelson the Gorilla Man, or the Dark Strangler. He managed to cross the country, killing at least 16 women, as well as 2 of their children, before making his way to Canada to avoid the growing manhunt. While in the country, he killed 2 more people before authorities were able to track him down and arrest him at a nearby train station. He escaped from the prison that very same night and boarded a train going south back into the States. The train happened to be carrying several members of the local police force who recaptured him and took him back to prison. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. Although he tried to appeal this for reasons of insanity, he was hanged in Winnipeg in early 1928 at the age of 30 years old after killing at least 23 people and having escaped incarceration on 7 separate occasions.
Coming in at number 5, Thomas Midgley Jr. This man is somewhat to blame for the absolute ludicrous gas prices right now. You'd be absolutely amazed what 50 bucks can get you, all about 9 feet. But this man isn't in charge of inflation, no, this man is the man who invented leaded gasoline. Invented in the early 1920s, chemist Thomas Midgley Jr. was working on some pretty cutting-edge chemistry. His task was to conjure a way to enhance automotive gasoline to reduce or eliminate the problem of engine knocking. TEL, or better known as tetrathiolide, was an additive mixed with gasoline to do exactly that. And on December 9th, Tommy here unwillingly and unknowingly created what is to be the most destructive, biodangerous chemical compound, slowly and efficiently destroying our atmosphere. Long story short, this guy created the world's worst pollutant known to us so far, lead. Lead is a naturally occurring metal found in Earth's crust. Its widespread use has resulted in aggressive human environmental contamination. Companies GM and Standard Oil formed the Ethel Corporation shortly hereafter to produce TEL. The company's name was carefully chosen to avoid the use of the word lead. Yeah, don't just take it right out. right out. Of course, shortly after its production, workers began suffering what would become lead poisoning, which resulting, not long after it opened, workers at the Ethel plant began suffering from poisoning, which in 1922, the US Public Health Service warned of the dangers of lead production and leaded fuel. However, the phase out of leaded gasoline wasn't officially banned until about 1996, and even in some places the early 2000s. It is estimated that 7 million tons of lead were released into the atmosphere from gasoline in the United States alone, and due to its popularity and production rate since the 1920s, it has been estimated by scientists that its result on the Earth accounted for about 900,000 deaths and about 22 million years of healthy life lost. I am not making a bold statement here and saying that this man shouldn't have been born. Maybe he could have been like a pilot or something, or a dentist. I don't know. Number 4, Gottlieb Kirchhoff. If you're anything like me and are addicted to the sweeter side of life, well then this one's for you. Seems like our boys here have something in common, but trying to find a solution actually led to creating something way worse. Gottlieb Kirchhoff was a German-Russian chemist who, through the use of his pharmacy, accidentally invented one of the world's worst things for you. The bittersweet part is that it's sugar. Well, high fructose sugar actually. Basically the thing that makes everything taste good. From sody pop to candy. Fructose, or high fructose corn syrup, is made by diluting cornstarch with hydrochloric acid? Excuse me, can I have the hydrochloric acid on the side? I actually just got a root canal. Yeah, thank you. But the bittersweet part comes from the effects. See, this guy had no idea the impact of his tasty formula would have on the body. Basically, this stuff is in everything we eat and drink. To give you some numbers, kills about 1 million people a year. And I'm lowballing. Messes up our body, regulates our energy levels, and is responsible for the diabetes crisis and one of the leading causes of death from disease for humans. That's not so sweet. Next time you eat or drink anything, just look at the label. See what's in it. This guy thought he was doing us all a favor, making things tastier, making things deadlier, dude. I tried to mix this list up a bit instead of repeating main players we know who've created or been responsible for all the atrocities, and I chose Kirchhoff to be on this list for the impact that he would have on the future. I'm looking at the long game here. And if this guy wasn't born, then we probably could have avoided this breakthrough chemical discovery. And unless I'm Kyle Reese from The Terminator, we'll never know.
Number 5 on this list is Thomas de Torquemada. This is a name that is often forgotten. Thomas isn't often talked about in the same conversations as some of the other people on this list. He didn't kill as many people as some of the other people here, but don't think for a second he wasn't as evil. Had he the means to do so, he assuredly would have killed far more people than he did, and he still killed a ton. Next Luxury writes, the first Grand Inquisitor Thomas de Torquemada was a religious zealot. Like many in Spain during the 14th century, he believed Catholicism was the one true religion, and anyone who disagreed had to be punished. The Spanish Inquisition was established to help combat heresy, but actually helped solidify those in power who ruled through fear and violence. De Torquemada was one of the nastiest members of the Spanish Inquisition who used brutal torture methods to get confessions from prisoners. He was also responsible for burning thousands of non-believers at the stake. It wasn't even enough for you to convert to Catholicism, this guy would still come after you even if you did. If he thought you converted because of fear or some other reason he deemed unfit, then he'd force you to wear certain garments and torture you. Heretics would get waterboarded and then often killed afterwards. He saw to the expulsion of over 40,000 Jews from Spain as well. He kicked them out, only allowing them to leave with what they could carry, having to abandon their homes and their livelihoods. On top of this, he killed thousands of people too. This guy was absolutely messed up and would do anything in his power to keep Catholicism alive in Spain. I guarantee that if you lived in Spain during the 1500s, then this guy would definitely have been haunting your dreams. Number 4 on this list is Osama bin Laden. I think we all know this name, and I wouldn't be shocked if some of you have already been haunted in your dreams by it. Next Luxury writes, unlike many of the other evil people on this list, Osama bin Laden wasn't responsible for the deaths of millions. He was officially held accountable for the deaths of 2,977 people. What makes him such a detestable individual was that the murders came about as a result of the September 11th attacks. This remains the deadliest terrorist attack in human history. The legend of the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden was behind the planning of the horrendous attack on American soil. It took 10 years for the American government to find him, finally discovering him hiding out in a compound in Pakistan. An assault on the home was undertaken and bin Laden was shot on site, ending one of the longest manhunts and bringing some closure to those impacted by the September 11th attacks. This is the biggest terrorist attack in history that we are talking about here, guys. One that shook America and the entire world when it happened. I would have been too young to remember it at the time, but most people you talk to can remember where they were and what they were doing when they heard the news that this happened. I can't imagine having that much hate inside yourself to want to do that to so many innocent people. But that was what Osama bin Laden had. He was filled with hate. He ruined the lives of so many people, and for that reason, he has to make this list. Number 3 on this list is Idi Amin. Idi Amin was a horrible individual who was brutal in every sense of the word. He overthrew the government in Uganda in 1971 and was in power there until 1979 when he was finally ousted. During his time in power, he showed the world just how horrifically evil he was. History.com says, once in power, Amin began mass executions upon the Akoli and Lango Christian tribes that had been loyal to Obote and therefore perceived as a threat. He also began terrorizing the general public through the various internal security forces he organized, such as the State Research Bureau and Public Safety Unity, whose main purpose was to eliminate those who opposed his regime. In 1972, Amin expelled Uganda's Asian population, which numbered between 50 and 70,000, resulting in a collapse of the economy as manufacturing, agriculture, and commerce came to a screeching halt without the appropriate resources to support them. Throughout his oppressive rule, Amin was estimated to have been responsible for the deaths of roughly 300,000 civilians. One of the worst parts about all of this is that he never had to pay for these heinous acts. After he was ousted in 1979, he fled to Saudi Arabia and just lived out the rest of his life there under protection. He lived comfortably there after having caused so much pain and death just years prior. He lived like this for decades until he finally died in 2003 from natural causes. Idi Amin doesn't get nearly as much media coverage as he should. The atrocities that took place in Uganda during the 70s need to be talked about more and must be acknowledged. Millions of people during that time would have been living in total fear of this man. I think it's fair to assume he probably still haunts the dreams of those who had to live through this terrible trauma.
Number 5. Robert Fisher. Robert Fisher was a man living in Arizona with his wife and 2 children, living quietly. He had worked as a surgical technician and had previously attempted to become a Navy SEAL. He was an avid outdoorsman, an expert hunter, angler, and camper, and found himself frustrated that his children didn't quite share this love of the outdoors with him. Fisher did all he could to present himself as an all-American, white picket fence, nuclear family man, but the truth was far more complicated than that. A child of divorce, Fisher had intense issues regarding separation operations. He and his wife fought constantly over everything, and reports from friends say that he was cruel, controlling, and manipulative to her during their marriage, refusing to let her decorate the house how she wanted, berating her constantly, and so forth. As well, he didn't socialize much outside of his family and was described as a loner. In late 2001, his wife Mary Fisher had had enough, and after nearly 20 years of marriage, was planning on filing for a divorce. On April 9th, 2001, neighbors would overhear a loud argument from the Fisher property. Later that night, the property would explode, burst into flames. Firefighters found inside the property the bodies of Mary Fisher alongside the Fisher son and daughter. Mary had been and the other victims slashed. Robert Fisher himself was not recovered at the site. Robert was thought to have set off the explosion in his own home intentionally as a way of burying his evidence and his tracks, and is thought to have fled entirely, hoping to begin again under a new identity. The thought process from police being he was terrified of Mary leaving him and afraid of repeating the childhood trauma of his mother's divorce. He saw fit to end the lives of his family rather than put them through that experience. Now, friends of Fisher had noted that there had actually been a pattern of worrying behavior before this. Allegedly, on one hunting trip after successfully bagging an elk, Fisher took the blood from the exit wound and smeared it all over his face. Another occasion describes him sneaking up on a family at a picnic to scare them by firing off shotgun rounds into the air, or an altercation in which he fatally a neighborhood dog for attacking his dog, although the police had suspected there was foul play. Fisher was never found, and police aren't even sure if he's still alive. One detective working the case said, "Maybe this is all we'll ever get. Maybe this is the best we've got, knowing he did it and never finding him again." And my ghouls and goblins, if it's scary stuff you're looking for, Top 5 Scary's gotta be one of the top 5 best places to watch scary videos. Ghosts, cryptids, real crimes, aliens, we got it all. Take a look through the cursed archives and see where it takes you. Now let's keep going. Number 4. Richard Lynn Bear. Richard Lynn Bear is an interesting exception on this list, as he's the only one of these fugitives who actually was caught. Now the problem with this is that he was not caught for very long. Didn't really take, as he escaped from jail shortly after being apprehended. Richard was wanted for the death of Sherry Hart, a divorcee and young mother who was waiting for a date on January 15th, 1984. Her date had stood her up, and she changed her evening plans to go out and have fun with high school friends Jeffrey Burgess and one Richard Lynn Bear. However, the evening would take an extremely dark turn when Bear would make an advance at Sherry Hart. She rebuked him, and infuriated and incensed, Richard bashed her with the butt of a handgun and ordered that Burgess drive them about an hour and a half away into the woods. Lynn Bear then dumped Sherry out of the vehicle in the woods, leaving her bleeding heavily. Burgess had told police he'd acted under the threat of his life, as Bear had told him he would see to it that Burgess died if he said anything about what had happened that night. However, Burgess was more than willing to cooperate with the police, leading them to finding Hart's remains and arresting both Bear and Burgess for the crime. However, Burgess would escape days before being tried from the small-town county jail, where he fled, adding him to the FBI's most wanted list for his crimes and unlawful flight to avoid persecution. As of this recording, the trail had gone completely cold, and Lynn Bear was never found again and is still wanted. Burgess passed away at the age of 46, having spent most of his life in and out of prison on various unrelated charges. Number 5. Frank Matthews. Our first spot is notorious criminal kingpin Frank Matthews, a legendary crime lord operating out of New York in the 1960s. Who also had some pretty cool classic mafia names like Pee-wee and Black Caesar, built himself a criminal empire that Los Polos Hermanos would have been jealous of. Starting out small, working in racketeering and illegal gambling ops in Philly in the 1960s, he had his sights set on much bigger things, working his way up, collecting numbers, making contacts, until he could start selling product for some serious money. By the early 1970s, he was already trading millions of dollars for illegal narcotics, importing his stuff from Latin America and distributing it throughout the States. Pee-wee had his hands and pockets across the country, with his criminal web spanning across 21 states at its peak. Naturally, if you're moving that much stuff around the country with that many people involved in your operation, eventually somebody's gonna get wise. And that's exactly what happened. Boys in Blue tapped Frankie's phone communications and put out a federal bulletin for his arrest. By December 1972, Frank and his girlfriend were arrested at McCarran International in Vegas. Okay, so he got caught. This kind of breaks the list a little bit, but hear me out a little bit here. Because after spending a paltry couple months in jail, Frankie made bail and quickly got out of Dodge to literally never be seen again. Now, there is some discrepancy as to what happened. The FBI suspects that he was taken care of by a major New York crime family for fears he may turn witness. But they did also post a bounty, a $200,000 bounty for finding him, so they suspected he might still be out there. No trace of him was ever found, no body ever discovered, and his story went cold. Is he sleeping with the fishes, or did he return to pull strings from the shadows? Or maybe he pulled a Saul Goodman and started managing a Cinnabon in Omaha, living life on the lam. Man, that's 2 Breaking Bad references in 1 point. I gotta spread them out a little bit more. We got lots more than awkwardly wedging in Breaking Bad references on Top 5 Scary. We've got the best horror content on the web at least twice a day, every day, so hit subscribe and stay spooked. Number 4, the Pickler. You know, at first glance, this is not a particularly threatening nickname. It kind of sounds like the absolute lamest Z-tier excuse for a Batman villain that you'd throw in as a warm-up before, you know, fighting the actual cool villain of that issue. Well, names can often be so deceiving because there really is not a lot that's funny about the Pickler once you understand why they called him that. He's maybe one of the most bizarre and macabre criminals I've ever read about. The Hungarian Bela Kiss lived in a small village near Budapest in the early 20th century. He lived with an elderly maid, but otherwise kept to himself. Didn't have a tight circle of friends, but he did enjoy frequent female company. I mean, of course, with a name like Bela Kiss. Makes sense. I gotta stop trying to make this guy sound cute because I'm gonna regret it in like 1 second. In 1914, during the height of the First World War, Bela left to fight with his country. Now, wartime sometimes necessitates borrowing resources wherever you can, and the Hungarian army was short on gas. On Bela's isolated property were dozens upon dozens of oil barrels all conspicuously laid out in his yard. Someone alerted the soldiers and they went to go borrow a cup or two, and were shocked to discover that upon cracking open the barrels were the bodies of several women floating in alcohol in a depraved attempt to preserve the corpses. Hence where the foul nickname the Pickler came from. See, it's not nearly as funny once you know why they call him that. 20 barrels, 20 missing women. That's somehow not even the scariest, craziest part of this whole story. The women had punctures in their necks and were drained of blood, which sounds completely made up that this guy might also have been a vampire. Now, the Hungarian army moved to seize Bela immediately, but tracking him proved rather difficult, as he had a fairly common name and was also, you know, he was in a war. Somehow, Bela was alerted that police had discovered his operation, and he left a corpse posing as himself in a military hospital and fled, never to be found again. Reported sightings popped up for a few years here and there. Allegedly, he moved to New York to begin a new life, but Bela eluded capture for the rest of his life. Unless he really was a vampire and is still out there, but I don't even want to entertain that possibility.
Number 5 on this list is Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong wanted China to become a superpower, but how he went about it wasn't the best. Loss of life to Mao Zedong really wasn't of much importance to him as long as the end goal was achieved. The BBC writes, Mao and other communist leaders set out to reshape Chinese society. Industry came under state ownership and China's farmers began to be organized into collectives. All opposition was ruthlessly suppressed. The Chinese initially received significant help from the Soviet Union, but relations soon began to cool. In 1958, in an attempt to introduce a more Chinese form of communism, Mao launched the Great Leap Forward. This aimed at mass mobilization of labor to improve agricultural and industrial production. The result instead was a massive decline in agricultural output, which together with poor harvests led to famine and the death of millions. The policy was abandoned and Mao's position weakened. In an attempt to reassert his authority, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution in 1966, aiming to purge the country of impure elements and revive the revolutionary spirit. 1.5 million people died and much of the country's cultural heritage was destroyed. In September 1967, with many cities on the verge of anarchy, Mao sent in the army to restore order. It was in this great leap forward that Mao's rule cost the lives of millions. He wanted to change China into an industrialized nation and implemented tons of unproven agricultural methods. This dropped the food output significantly and led to the Great Chinese Famine. This famine is largely regarded as the deadliest man-made disaster in human history, so yeah, it was pretty bad. Unlike others on this list, Mao for the most part wasn't infatuated with the deaths of citizens. It was just a byproduct of his incompetency and horrible rule. Granted, we can't let him off too easily because he also didn't care that much to change his way of thinking. During his reign of power, it's estimated that 40 to 70 million Chinese civilians died through forced labor, executions, or famine. Number 4 on this list is Nero. We're throwing it way back with this one and going to the year 37 AD. That's when Nero was born and he lived until 68 AD. Only just over 30 years of life, but he did enough during that time to earn himself a spot on this list. Wikipedia writes, most Roman sources offer overwhelmingly negative assessments of his personality and reign. The historian Tacitus claims the Roman people thought him compulsive and corrupt. Suetonius tells that many Romans believed that the Great Fire of Rome was instigated by Nero to clear land for his planned Golden House. Tacitus claims that Nero seized Christians as scapegoats for the fire and had them burned alive, seemingly motivated not by public justice but by personal cruelty. This personal cruelty of his is widely documented and nobody was safe from it. One would think that your own mother would be on the do not kill list, but apparently not for Nero. To rid himself of any potential outside influences, he had his own mother murdered. He's said to have stabbed, burned, boiled, impaled people for his own personal pleasure. Couple this with the fact that he's said to have burned down entire cities while people are still inside of them, and you get a horrible tyrannical dictator who, I'm sad to report, actually did exist. Number 3 on this list is Pol Pot. Wikipedia writes, Pol Pot was a Cambodian revolutionary and politician who governed Cambodia as Prime Minister of Democratic Kampuchea between 1976 and 1979. Ideologically a Marxist-Leninist and a Khmer nationalist, he was a leading member of Cambodia's communist movement, the Khmer Rouge, from 1963 until 1997, and served as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Kampuchea from 1963 to 1981. Under his administration, Cambodia was converted into a one-party communist state and went through the events of the Cambodian genocide. The Cambodian genocide is something that we don't learn about enough in history class. This genocide claimed the lives of at least 1.5 million Cambodian civilians from 1975 to 1979. 1.5 million is already a ridiculously large number, but it should also be noted that in 1975, this would have accounted for roughly a quarter of the entire country. Pol Pot and the party that he led during this time wanted to turn Cambodia into an agrarian socialist republic. At the time, Mao Zedong was in charge of China and Pol Pot went to him for advice on how to make this a reality. To do this, he emptied out cities and forced people into labor camps where they were either executed or simply worked to death. Disease and malnutrition was also rampant in these camps and the quality of life was horrible. Money was abolished and everybody was forced to wear the exact same black clothing, stripping people of any sense of their individuality. This truly was a horrible time in Cambodian history and saw so many atrocities committed countrywide. It finally ended when the Vietnamese invaded Cambodia in 1979 and Pol Pot's government fell. He lived for roughly another 20 years though, finally dying in 1998.
Number 3, Alfred Nobel. We're sort of seeing a pattern here. These people had somewhat of a good intention that later turned out to be not so good, which led us to even asking, were they even supposed to be born at all? Cruel, but food for thought. Alfred Nobel was a Swedish chemist, engineer, inventor, and philanthropist, and known for having sacrificed his entire fortune to establish the Nobel Prize, holding 355 patents of his own in his own lifetime. Smarty pants. Nobel's most famous invention? Dynamite. A safer and easier way of harnessing the explosive power of nitroglycerin. That sentence in itself is hilarious. And in 1867, it would soon be used worldwide for mining and infrastructure development, and oh yeah, pretty much blowing anything and everything up ever since. And of course, let's not forget the impact of dynamite's effect on a person, place, or thing in its vicinity. We've all seen the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons. And this guy invented it. Dynamite. The stick, wick, and patented chemical compound was harnessed to do exactly that. And if we've read anything at all, it did a lot of bad. First off, how do you exactly tinker and tailor with an explosion? What happens when you can't crack the code? He's just in his basement like messing around with vials. Just a little bit more of that, little bit of this, and get down! The fact that this man did not blow himself up in any of these experiments is beyond me, and not only was this invention a new form of mass energy, in fact the Nobel Prize was created and named after him. He was the first. This invention and contribution was so ahead of its time in chemistry that it revolutionized the need to push evolution ahead through science. Its creation in itself is history for mankind. The dichotomy alone. Had this man known about all the cliche train track damsel in distress westerns that would have been parodied of his destructive invention, I don't know if he would have invented it in the first place. What do you think? Number 2, the Angel of Death. Okay, This guy definitely had it coming for sure with this list. The Angel of Death was a nickname given to this person for the disturbing amount of research he had collected via his specific scientific experiments. Why I think he shouldn't have been born at all is because to attain such groundbreaking information about the human body and its extremes, experiments needed to be run and not hypothesized. Joseph Mengele was a SS officer, doctor, and German scientist during World War II, and resulted in the leading of research closely related to the extremes and limitations of the capability of the human body, via DNA, via manipulation, and disease prevention, immunization, you name it. Any effect on the human body and its environment around them. I'm not going to get into what this person concocted up in his time as a medical captain, nor am I really going to make any jokes. This person pushed scientific research through the use of cruelty and pure evilness. Plain and simple. I don't like glorifying these people in these lists, and I can barely stand saying some of their names out loud. We know all of these people. Though the actual number of people's lives countlessly lost due to this man's sick fascination with pushing research and his scientific envelope hasn't been officially documented, these experiments were responsible for the deaths of somewhat of 6 million innocent lives. It is very clear that this person's intent was to derive violence, fear, and cruelty from day one, which I myself wish this person was never born. Crimes against humanity. No good. And number 1. Nuclear fission. J. Robert Oppenheimer was an American theoretical physicist and was director of the Los Alamos Laboratory during the Manhattan Project, responsible for the research and creation of the very first atomic bomb. He is often known as the father of the atomic bomb, and his research in 1945 with nuclear fission, the result of smashing atoms into each other with the mass energy containment resulting in a massive explosion. A massive explosion, and that is an understatement. Just Google mushroom cloud. Scientists first developed nuclear technology during World War II. Thankfully, atomic bombs have been used only twice in war, both times by the United States, at the end of World War II in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Fat Man and Little Boy were the official names given to the two explosive devices. Charming. What makes this so terrifying is that due to this research, the act of war and the structure of battles are now a thing of prehistoric past. The mass execution that these inventions can do is nuclear. Literally. I put Oppenheimer at the top of this list because the devastation alone due to the future with merely the technology surfacing is detrimental in itself. This is actually the first time reports that a visitor from another galaxy started. These explosions were so giant that its effect could be felt off planet. Yo, that's next level. Aliens just pulling up. Yeah, that's not really good, you know. If there was a time in the future which we could send back AI, it would probably be due to this stuff. Oppenheimer was awarded the Medal of Merit from President Harry Truman in 1946 for the push in science, even if its push was in the wrong direction. All these people given awards, it's like, hey, good job. It's terrible stuff, but cheers.
Number 5 on this list is Pelagius. Pelagius lived around 390 AD, and although very little is known about his personal life, we do know that the church was really not happy with his theological teachings. The Catholic gentleman says, Pelagianism radically corrupted the church's teachings on grace, sin, and the fall. Its namesake, the British monk Pelagius, taught that the sin of Adam had no bearing on subsequent generations. Essentially, man was inherently good and unaffected by the fall. In practice, this meant that a man could come to God by his own free will with no grace needed. Many saints fought against this doctrine. Saint David of Wales stands out among them especially, but it was Saint Augustine of Hippo, arguably the greatest of the Latin doctors, and the church's mightiest champion against heresy, who rose to fight against this inherently venomous strand of thought. Against Pelagius, Saint Augustine upheld the truth that God's grace is entirely necessary for any movement of ours towards God to occur at all. As he himself puts it, we, for our part, assert that the human will is so divinely aided towards the doing of righteousness that besides being created with the free choice of his will, and besides the teaching which instructs him how he ought to live, he receives also the Holy Spirit, through which there arises in his heart a delight in and love of that supreme and unchangeable eternal good which is God, and this arises even now while he still walks by faith and not by sight. Everything about Pelagius's teachings went against what the church wanted. They wanted and believed that people needed to be committed to God through them, but what this man was teaching was kind of going against that. This scared the church a lot because it was undermining their power to act as the medium for the average human being and God. Therefore, Pelagius had to be stopped. There's no record of him being executed, but we do know that at one point he had to flee Rome and go into hiding to continue his work. Number 4 on this list is Asmodeus. Asmodeus is actually a demon, and whether or not he is real can definitely be debated. But what can't be debated is how scared the church was of him. Grunge says the demon known as Asmodeus appears in the book of Tobit, a Judeo-Christian book of the Bible that's either religious canon or apocrypha depending on which branch of Christianity you subscribe to. Asmodeus is said to be the worst of the demons. He doesn't hesitate to kill, and he has what has to be the lamest, most specific Achilles heel in the history of monsters. In the book of Tobit, there's a young woman named Sarah who would very much like to be married. She becomes engaged, gets married, and then right before the sweet consummating, Asmodeus shows up and kills her husband. What might seem like a fluke quickly becomes a trend, as this happens to Sarah a total of 7 times. On lucky number 8, Sarah, who must have been an amazing conversationalist for this many guys to roll these dice, marries a guy named Tobias, who the Archangel Raphael gives the scoop on how to beat Asmodeus. The demon appears on the wedding night, and Tobias tosses a fish's heart and liver onto some coals, causing smoke that triggers Asmodeus's asthma or something like that. Asmodeus scampers off, and Raphael tracks him down, ties him up, and strangles him. So luckily for us, the text says that there's no more of Asmodeus, but that doesn't mean that his evil spirit doesn't still linger on. This is a demon that we're talking about here, and one of the worst ones ever at that. So I wouldn't be surprised if getting rid of this guy for good is a pretty hard thing to accomplish. Also, just a sidebar here, but poor Sarah, eh? This lady's just trying to get married and literally has to do it 8 separate times before one finally sticks. I think after marriage number 3, I'd personally just call it quits and get a puppy or something. Number 3 on this list is Beelzebub, another demon who is probably one of the most famous religious demons out there. Grunge says Beelzebub, a demon with roots in old Philistine religions. His name comes up in the Bible a few times in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, and he may be a stand-in for Satan, but another translation of Beelzebub is Lord of the Flies. John Milton's theory, described in Paradise Lost, is that he's a lieutenant of hell, second in power only to Satan, which is what folks in the industry refer to as Resume Gold. The starring role of Beelzebub's career is probably his part in the Salem witch trials, in which he was blamed for inhabiting the bodies of the accused. For anyone riding the fence on whether or not there was any real justice to be had there, it's worth looking at the writings of Cotton Mather, a Puritan minister in the area at the time. In his work of Beelzebub and his plot, Mather wrote that there is a devil in a thing doubted by none but such as are under the influences of the devil. If Beelzebub was actually real, then he is responsible for the death of tons of people due to all of the witch stuff that went down. Not to mention just the trials, but what sort of stuff did he actually make these people do? It could be any number of things that we still don't even know about today. For obvious reasons, the church was not too fond of this demon, but it wasn't just the church. Your average everyday individual wasn't too fond of him at all either. Like, think about it. Back in the day, you would have to worry about having Beelzebub come and get you, and then you'd be put on the stake for being a witch if you did. Now obviously, these witch trials were not done even remotely how they should have been, and it's unclear whether or not Beelzebub did or didn't play a role in them. But still, it doesn't change the fact that you would have been worried about him if you were alive back then.
Starting off at number 5, parents. Look, let's just get this one right out of the way now, okay? Parents, y'all can be the worst sometimes. The whole myth of the boogeyman came about as a way for parents to scare their kids into acting right. Like the whole, you better behave or the boogeyman will get you thing. Absolutely the worst. Now, whenever your kid is going to sleep at night in their dark room, the house will do what houses do and settle. Or something might fall, or the wind will blow outside just a little harder than usual, and now that kid is laying in bed terrified, thinking that something is coming out of its closet or under its bed, despite that kid's best efforts to be the best behaved kid you've ever met. Congratulations, you terrified your kid, but on the other hand, nightlight sales have probably been given a bit of a boost, so hey, you scared your kid and contributed to capitalism. Round of applause for you. Number 4, Crybaby Bridge. Down in Georgia, where all kinds of creepypastas and urban legends are running amok, there's one bridge famous for its boogeyman, Crybaby Bridge. Now, there are many bridges that have picked up this name in the US, but this one stands apart. What is an unassuming rickety wooden bridge with no safety rails during the daytime is the most haunted bridge in Georgia by night. The legends say that a single mother, crying and hoping for the end, was driving one rainy night with a small passenger in the back seat. Blinded by the rain and her own distraught tears, she drove off the rickety bridge that would later become Crybaby Bridge. The water below was not horribly deep, but for a woman who didn't care for her life and the helpless one in the back, the water brought the end. Since that day, a legend arose warning against anyone who dares stop on the bridge and turn off their headlights. Who better to test out urban legends than a group of 6 bored teenagers who had read the urban legend and decided to investigate. They piled into a car and drove out to Crybaby Bridge on a dark, unlit road surrounded by dense thickets of trees and brush. The teenagers drove out onto the 30-foot bridge as it creaked and crackled under the weight of their car. All at once, they agreed to get out of the car, but as they did, something below used their movement as cover for its own. The group grew quiet, trying to bring on whatever was supposed to happen, but as they grew quiet, so did the nightlife around. No crickets, no birds, no frogs. After a moment of silence, the faint sound of a crying baby slowly began to echo from downstream. Below the bridge, something was moving, trying to slip through the water without making too much sound. Then, a figure, man-like but all out of whack, appeared at the end of the bridge. It had a huge face with little beady black eyes, a huge nose but flattened. The face was covered in thick, reddish hair, and from its mouth were the sounds of a crying baby. But as the teens shone their light on this creature, the crying stopped. Now, the 9-foot tall creature stepped forward, a huge, muscular creature with elongated arms. As the teens recoiled in horror, another similar creature began reaching up from under the bridge, trying to get a hold on an ankle. This was a trap. What happens next? Well, you have to read the rest for yourself, sorry. Number 3, the Bye-Bye Man. Eli was a graduate student living in the town of Sun Prairie, Wisconsin in the fall of 1990 with his girlfriend Catherine and a friend named Jonathan. Someone had found an old Ouija board in an attic and for fun gave it to the 3 friends who had been living together. Just like any group of friends would, the 3 began conducting experiments with the board, seeing if this whole superstition thing was real. Turns out they had a pretty wild ride. After they believed they had communicated with a number of spirits, they decided to make an effort to contact a spirit that had actually been a living human. The board eventually transmitted the story of the Bye-Bye Man, a blind albino man born in Louisiana sometime in the 1920s. According to the story, his parents put him in an orphanage in Algiers, New Orleans, where he was shunned. The boy eventually escaped the orphanage and turned to the life of a killer. Jumping on trains and traveling around wherever he wanted, he was accompanied by his companion called Gloomsinger, which was a dog-like creature sewn together from the tongues and the eyes of his victims. Well, unfortunately, the 3 friends, Eli, Catherine, and Jonathan, were told via the Ouija board that the spirit of the Bye-Bye Man had latched onto them and that he was coming for them. Apparently, anyone who thought of or said the Bye-Bye Man's name became his next target. He then began riding the rails in their direction, sending out Gloomsinger to locate the person. Once they were found, Gloomsinger would let out a shrill whistle to call to the Bye-Bye Man. The history of the Bye-Bye Man is traced back to a teenager who told a reporter that he took his family's lives because the Bye-Bye Man made him do it. Luckily for Eli, Catherine, and Jonathan, they were not driven to hurt anyone, but they were definitely scared out of their skin. There's a movie based on this story, but in that one, things don't end so nicely.
Number 5. Randy Greenawalt and Gary Tyson. As a 2-for-1 bonus for our viewers, our first entry on this list details the imprisonment, escape, and brutal rampage of 2 prisoners from the Florence State Prison in Arizona, USA. In 1974, Randy Greenawalt and his brother James were held on suspicion for the murder of a truck driver named Stanley Sandage. The brothers had shot the driver and taken his wallet before being arrested when they tried to purchase stereo equipment with the victim's credit card. The authorities realized that the killing was extremely similar to the death of another driver, Henry Weber, 4 days earlier. The 2 brothers were charged with the murders, but Randy was able to avoid the death penalty by testifying against his brother. He was sent to Florence State Prison where he met Gary Tyson. Tyson had attempted to escape several times and was serving a life sentence for stabbing a prison guard. The 2 men formed a plan together to try and escape with the help of Tyson's 3 sons, who showed up to visiting day with a concealed shotgun and helped the 2 prisoners to overpower the guards and escape, with plans of escaping to a ranch in Mexico. They quickly ran into trouble when their car blew a tire. A kind stranger driving with his wife, infant son, and teenage niece came across them and tried to see if they needed help. They were taken prisoner by the convicts and taken into the desert, where they were shot and left for dead, while Greenawalt and the Tysons fled in the family's Mazda. They made contact with a woman Greenawalt had become pen pals with, who bought them a truck and ammunition, plans of making their way to an airplane that Gary had chartered for their escape. The police caught wind of this, and the gang was forced to try and make alternate arrangements. They made their way to Texas, where they killed a couple of newlyweds and took their car. Days later, they were met with a roadblock, which they ruthlessly barreled their way through, before being met with another one 6 miles down the road. The officers opened fire on the gang, hitting one of the Tyson sons who was driving. The remaining 2 brothers and Greenawalt were captured, but Gary Tyson got away, although he was found dead in the desert 11 days later, having died a slow death of exposure to the elements. The brothers were sentenced to life in prison, and Gary was executed by lethal injection after spending 2 decades on death row. Number 4. Lyda Southard, the Black Widow. While not all marriages end well, and some can accurately be described as unmitigated disasters, few have ended as poorly as the various marriages of Lyda Southard. But, for all her faults, no one can say she didn't take the vow of till death do us part seriously. Lyda married her first husband, Robert Dooley, in the year 1912. For a while, it seemed a good match, with Dooley's brother Edward joining them on their ranch in Twin Falls, Idaho, and the couple having a daughter named Lorraine 2 years later. When she was a year old, Lorraine suddenly died, having apparently drunk tainted water from a dirty well. Tragedy struck again later that year when Edward died of food poisoning. 2 months after that, Robert died of typhoid fever, and Lyda was left the only surviving family member. Fortunately for her, she had taken out life insurance policies on each of her family members and had over $4,500 to try and start over after this tragedy. She soon married William G. McCaffell, becoming the stepmother to his 3-year-old daughter. When his daughter fell ill and died, the couple decided to move to Montana together, but within a year, William died of influenza, leaving poor Lyda a widow once again. Bad luck seemed to follow her wherever she went, with her next husbands, Harlan C. Lewis and Edward F. Meyer, both dying of sudden illnesses within 4 months of marrying Lyda. A relative of her first husband started to notice the pattern and had his family's corpses exhumed and examined, proving that all had died of arsenic poisoning. The other bodies showed the same results when tested, and Lyda was arrested before she had a chance to murder her 5th husband, Paul Southard, for the insurance money. She was sentenced to 10 years to life in the old Idaho State Penitentiary, where she remained as a model prisoner for the next 10 years. The guards eventually stopped watching her as closely as they should have, and in 1931 she managed to remove a bar from her prison window and use her bed sheets to construct a rope in order to escape. She remained at large for over a year until she was found in Topeka, Kansas, married to her 6th husband, Harry Whitlock. She was taken into custody for another 10 years before being released in 1941. She died of a heart attack in 1958, whereupon her 7th husband, Hal Shaw, likely breathed an unconscious sigh of relief.
Number 2. Terry Sherman. The great thing about the boogeyman is that it has no one form. It's just the manifestation of whatever people fear. For the Native American Navajo people, this would be the Skinwalker. Now before I get into this, everything I tell you is coming from the brief amounts of research I did when making this video, so if I get something wrong or mispronounce certain things, feel free to politely correct me in the comments below. Similar but not the same to the Russian Baba Yaga, the Skinwalker is a kind of wicked sorcerer who can transform into, occupy, or disguise themselves as an animal. It has deep roots in Aboriginal American folklore. Other tribes throughout the region also have their own versions of the Skinwalker. The Pueblo people, Apache, and Hopi people each have their own unique interpretation of what a Skinwalker might be. Some believe that Skinwalkers are produced when a medicine man abuses magic for evil, corrupting the natural order of things, turning them into an evil entity capable of controlling and turning into animals, or even possessing others. There's also another version that says that one becomes a Skinwalker by performing some kind of taboo act, similar to the tale of the Wendigo. In Navajo stories, the Nagloshi were agents for the holy people when they were first training humans in the blessing way. Nagloshi were supposed to abandon the mortal world with the holy people, but a few decided to stay behind. Their greed and desire to stay in the mortal plane corrupted the power the holy people gave them and transformed them into malicious semi-divine beings. Now, I'm actually putting myself in quite a bit of danger here even talking about this, as these beings are not something you are supposed to talk about. Even the people who named this being aren't willing to talk about it, especially not with outsiders, so be courteous and don't go asking about it. Most of you have likely heard of Sherman Ranch, also known as Skinwalker Ranch. This ranch near Ballard, Utah is apparently a cursed lot of land that has had many different kinds of encounters. One is of interest to us right now. Terry Sherman, the owner of the property way back in 1996, was walking his dogs around the farm late at night when he came upon a wolf. A wolf 3 times the size of a regular one with glowing red eyes and an incredibly mean look. Terry claims to have attacked the beast, but no evidence is actually available. Was this the Navajo's boogeyman? Who knows? Number 1, Cropsey. Okay, this one is going to get a bit more real. In Staten Island, USA, a tale of a boogeyman-like creature named Cropsey was famous among many kids who lived in the area. Cropsey was said to be an axe-wielding man who escaped from a mental institution and would lurk around in the dark tunnels below the old abandoned Willowbrook State School, a facility for children with intellectual disabilities that was shuttered after allegations of horrific mistreatment were exposed. The story says Cropsey comes out at night to snatch young people and bring them back into the abandoned Willowbrook. But the horror tale was actually a horrifying reality. Cropsey was in actuality Andre Rand, a suspected killer who was convicted for the passing of 2 young individuals in the 1970s. In keeping with the tale, Rand worked as a janitor at Willowbrook in the mid-1960s. Before his capture, Rand was homeless and living in a makeshift campsite on the grounds of the abandoned school not far from the Seaview Hospital that was so closely tied to the Cropsey legend. Rand's story and the tale of Cropsey continues to fascinate and horrify kids and even adults to this day. In fact, 2 filmmakers, Joshua Zeman and Barbara Brancaccio, grew up on Staten Island and listened to the terrifying Cropsey stories when they were children. As adults, their curiosity led them to dig deeper into the urban legend of Cropsey and the real cases of the island's missing people. They even made a documentary, Cropsey, that explores the bizarre case of the boogeyman who seemed to come to life.
Number 2 on this list is Arianism. Arianism wasn't a person necessarily, but a full-on train of thought by many different people that the church was extremely scared of. The Catholic gentleman says, aside from the various Gnostic sects that plagued the early church, it is in Arianism that is arguably the most famous of all Christian heresies. It struck at the very root and core of Christian teaching that Jesus was God himself in the flesh and relegated the person of Jesus Christ to that of a mere created thing. It lives on today in varying forms, from well-known sects like the Jehovah's Witnesses all the way to the bizarre world of Apollo Quiloboy. Moreover, it still lurks within the sentences of some modern theologians who ambiguously state that Jesus is the Christ, but no more than an exalted man. Saint Athanasius of Alexandria was the walking cure for this heresy. Stubborn and unshakable, I think it not a stretch to say at times that this great man stood alone against wave after
after wave of Arian attacks on the truth of the Christian faith. By emphasizing and stubbornly holding to the truth of Christ as both God and man, St. Athanasius effectively ended the reign of the Arian heresy within the church. At the root, Arianism is basically the thinking that instead of being born, Jesus was created by God. This obviously goes against a lot of what the church teaches and believes in, and therefore they weren't too fond of this thinking or anyone who thought it. Pretty much anybody back in the day who did wholeheartedly believe this was condemned as being a heretic, and some bad things would be coming down the pipe if that was you. And finally, number 1 on this list is the devil. This one seems obvious, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean that we shouldn't include it on the list. The devil has always been the one to blame for any evil that is plaguing the earth. A great famine takes the lives of thousands of people. The devil did it. Someone loses their minds and kills a bunch of people. They must have been taken over by the devil. My coupon for 20% off on hot wings expired a week ago. Must have been the devil. Obviously, everyone was scared of the devil if he came for them. The church was scared of it, and the average person was scared of it. What is really interesting to me, though, is that the devil, even though he is horribly scary, is actually necessary to religion and the church. Without a devil, the only person to blame for anything bad happening would be God. The guy who's supposed to look out for us all the time would actually be the one doing all of the nasty things that happen to us, as well as all of the good things. Therefore, if we wish to believe that God is good and has our best intentions at heart, we sort of need to have a devil around to take the blame for all this stuff. It's just interesting to think that without the devil, one might be able to argue that we are the most scared of God. Not sure how I feel about that, but a cool thought experiment nonetheless.